This story is titled, My Wife Mocked MITINY Performance in Front of Her Friends, but what I did next left her speechless. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I, James, 38, never thought I'd be sharing this story. But after lurking on this sub for months, I figure maybe writing this all out might help me process everything that's happened. Been with my wife Laura, 36 female, for almost 9 years, married for 8 of them. Always thought we had a decent thing going, not perfect, but whose marriage is, right? Some background on me. I've been working my way up in financial consulting for the last 15 years. Started at the bottom, no college degree, just hustled my ass off and learned everything I could. My old man always said, education comes in many forms. He was a blue-collar guy who worked with his hands his whole life, but was one of the smartest people I've ever known. He taught me that respect is earned through actions, not words. I built a solid reputation for being the guy who can handle difficult clients that nobody else wants to deal with, the problem solver, the fixer. Physically, I've always been in pretty good shape. I hit the gym 4 to 5 times a week, played rugby in college, and dabbled in amateur MMA in my 20s. Nothing professional, but I won more fights than I lost. I'm not huge or anything, but I've always been proud of staying fit, 6 feet 1 inch and around 190 lb, mostly muscle. Never had issues with confidence or self-esteem, at least not until the last few years of my marriage. Laura works in pharmaceutical sales, one of those jobs where your appearance and ability to schmooze matters more than actual knowledge of the products. She's always talking about networking and making the right connections to climb the corporate ladder, the kind of person who judges restaurants by whether the right people might see her there. So anyway, one Friday, she insisted we host this dinner party for her coworkers and their spouses. It's important for my career, she said, in that tone that meant there was no room for discussion. I'm not big on hosting parties. I'd rather be watching the game with a couple buddies, but I figured it was important to her. So why not? Spent all day busting my ass to make everything perfect. Cleaned the whole house top to bottom, cooked a 3-course meal. I've always enjoyed cooking, something my dad taught me made. Sure, the wine was properly chilled. The works. Made this roast that takes like 6 hours to cook properly. Homemade appetizers. Even baked a damn cheesecake from scratch. Evening starts off fine. Everyone's having appetizers, making small talk, complimenting my cooking. These pharmaceutical types, all dressed like they just stepped out of a catalog, perfect hair, perfect teeth, perfect fucking small talk. I start thinking, maybe this won't suck after all. I can play the good host for one night. Then Laura gets to her 3rd glass of wine. I know her patterns. Beer makes her sleepy, liquor makes her angry, but wine makes her mean. The conversation somehow gets to relationships, and she gets this look on her face, this smile. I've learned means trouble is coming. It's like watching a car crash about to happen, but being unable to stop it. She turns to her colleagues and says, "You know what's funny?" Her voice was way louder than it needed to be. When we first met, I thought he would be this amazing catch tall, successful, impressive in all areas. And she emphasized all like she was in some bad comedy routine. I'm immediately on edge. I know where this is heading. Her colleague's husband asks, "And he isn't?" Everyone laughs, thinking it's just married couple banter. Then she holds up her hand, pinching her thumb and index finger together with barely any space between them, and says, "Some things don't measure up to expectations." The whole table erupts in laughter while I'm sitting there with my face burning red, but she wasn't even done. Honestly, it's like being married to a teenage boy, quick to start, quicker to finish, if you know what I mean. More laughter. Sometimes I wonder if I should buy him a booster seat for dinner. One of her female coworkers tried changing the subject, probably feeling how uncomfortable this was getting, but Laura kept going. No, really, it's fine. We all have our crosses to bear. Mine's just smaller than most. Then she raised her glass in this mocking toast. I just sat there, frozen, my food untouched, my hands gripping my napkins so hard my knuckles turned white. The conversation finally moved on, but the damage was done. I could see it in everyone's eyes, pity, embarrassment, that uncomfortable awareness you can't unsee. My manhood, my confidence, my dignity all laid out as a joke at my own dinner table. The worst part? This wasn't even the first time she'd done something like this. It was just the first time she'd done it in front of people I'd have to face again. I remember thinking, I cooked all this food, cleaned this house, and this is how she treats me? But like always, I swallowed it down, smiled through it, because that's what men are supposed to do, right? Suck it up. Don't make a scene. But something broke in me that night, something that wouldn't be fixed. What hurt the most wasn't just the humiliation. It was realizing that the person who was supposed to be my closest ally, my partner, thought so little of me that she'd use my most private insecurities as dinner entertainment. I somehow made it through the rest of dinner on autopilot, clearing plates, refilling drinks, forcing smiles, making sure everyone had coffee and dessert, playing the perfect host while dying inside. But behind my smile, something was breaking. Something fundamental was shifting in how I saw my marriage, Laura, and myself. After everyone left, she acted like nothing happened, kicked off her heels, flopped on the couch, and started scrolling through her phone. When I confronted her about it, she just dismissed my feelings completely. Oh, lighten up. It was just a joke. Everyone has these playful jabs at their partners. You're being too sensitive. She didn't even look up from her phone. Would you like it if I made jokes about your body in front of your colleagues? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. She rolled her eyes. God, you're so dramatic. It's different for men and women. Besides, they all know I love you. Then she got up and headed to the bedroom. I'm tired. Don't stay up too late cleaning. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her words played on repeat in my mind. This wasn't the first time she'd made comments like this, but it was the first time she'd done it so publicly, so deliberately. I thought about my dad and what he taught me growing up. He was old school, believed a man should provide, protect, and persevere. He'd worked the same job for 40 years without complaining once, even when his hands got so arthritic he could barely hold a pen. Son, he told me once, the measure of a man isn't in his wallet or his pants. It's in how he carries himself when life gets heavy. Dad died 2 years ago, cancer. Fought it like a champ right to the end. Never complained, not even once. Just kept telling us not to worry, that he'd had a good life. That's the kind of man I wanted to be, the kind of husband I tried to be. I'd carried this marriage for years, taking her jabs, her criticism, her disrespect, all because I thought that's what a good husband does. My dad would never have complained about his marriage. He and Mom had been together 45 years when he died, but I'm pretty sure Mom never mocked his manhood in front of their friends either. But this dinner party was different. This was the catalyst that finally opened my eyes to the truth of our relationship. Sometimes humiliation can be the wake-up call you never knew you needed. As I lay there, I started to wonder, when had I become this person? This pushover who would smile and serve dessert after being emasculated in front of strangers. My dad taught me to be strong, to be respectful, but he never taught me to be a doormat. I realized something else too. My dad and Mom had disagreements, sure, but there was always respect there, always love. I couldn't remember the last time I felt respected by Laura, and if I was being honest with myself, I couldn't remember the last time I felt loved either. Morning came, and with it a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't a partnership. This was something else, something toxic, And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider a word I'd never associated with my marriage before: abuse. That dinner party wasn't a one-off thing. As I lay awake that night, memories came flooding back, a constant stream of small cuts that had slowly bled my self-worth dry over our years together. In the beginning, her comments were subtle, disguised as jokes or helpful suggestions. "Maybe you should wear shoes with thicker soles," she'd say, before we went to events with her colleagues. "It might help you look more authoritative." I'd laugh it off, thinking she was just being practical. "You might want to let me order for both of us," she'd say at restaurants with her friends. "You always choose the wrong wine." Then she'd pat my hand like I was a child. This, despite the fact that I've always been in great shape. I used to compete in amateur MMA fights in my 20s. Nothing professional, but I held my own. She knew this. Hell, I have a small trophy case in our basement that she insisted we hide away when her parents first visited. "It seems so aggressive," she'd said. "I don't want them to think you're some kind of meathead." She'd always find ways to minimize my accomplishments while highlighting her own. When I closed a big account at work, she'd say, "That's nice," and change the subject. But if she got the smallest recognition at her job, we'd have to go out to celebrate, and she'd talk about it for weeks. Then came the bedroom comments. What started as guidance quickly turned into criticism. "Is that it?" she'd ask with visible disappointment. Or worse, she'd sigh and turn away, mumbling, "Don't worry about it." I'm used to it by now. Each time, I tried harder to please her, only to face more disappointment, more sighs, more subtle headshakes. I remember this one time I suggested trying something new in bed, nothing crazy, just mixing things up a bit. She laughed and said, "That's cute, but you can barely handle the basics. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." After a while, I stopped initiating. Why set yourself up for failure, right? Then she started complaining that I never initiated anymore. "Most husbands actually want to sleep with their wives," she'd say. It was like being trapped in a no-win situation. My promotion at work 3 years ago should have been a celebration. I'd finally made regional manager after years of grinding, a 40% pay increase and a company car. Instead, when I proudly told her about it, she responded, "That's nice. I guess they must not have had many options this year." Then immediately changed the subject to her own work accomplishments. I remember standing in our kitchen, bottle of Macallan 18 unopened, as she talked about herself for 40 minutes straight. I'd bought that bottle to celebrate with her, ended up drinking it alone in the garage a month later, while working on my project car A69 Camaro. I'd been restoring for years. The garage became my sanctuary, the one place she rarely went because she didn't like the smell. In retrospect, it was probably the only part of my life she hadn't completely invaded and critiqued. Family gatherings were another battlefield. She'd introduce me to distant relatives with a hand on my shoulder, saying things like, "This is my husband. He's not what I expected when I dreamed about marriage as a little girl, but we make do, don't we, honey?" All while wearing that perfect smile that made everyone think she was just being playfully affectionate. When we'd shop for clothes, she'd hold up smaller sizes and say, "Maybe someday, right?" in front of store assistants. If I tried something on that I liked, she'd frown slightly and say, "It's fine if that's what you want, but it doesn't really do you any favors." Even my hobbies weren't safe. When I started taking boxing again, something I'd always enjoyed, she laughed and told her friends on the phone, "It's his midlife crisis. I think he's trying to recapture his glory days, but mostly he just comes home sore and whiny." I stopped going after 3 months. The worst was when my dad got sick. Instead of supporting me through one of the hardest times of my life, she turned it into a chore. "Do we have to go visit him again?" "We just went last weekend." Or, "I don't see why you need to be there so much. The doctors are doing everything they can." The night after his funeral, she complained that I was bringing the mood down at home and suggested I try to move on. My father wasn't even in the ground yet, and she was telling me to get over it. Looking back now, I can see so clearly what I couldn't see then. This was a pattern of systematic emotional abuse death, by 1,000 cuts, each one small enough to dismiss individually, but together they had nearly destroyed me. The most messed up pattern was how she'd build me up in private just enough to tear me down in public. She'd say I looked handsome as we got ready for an event, only to later tell everyone how she had to help me coordinate my outfit because I dressed like a colorblind teenager. She'd praise a meal I cooked at home, then tell dinner guests I was still learning basic techniques. Our vacations followed the same script. She'd criticize my planning abilities, my navigation skills, my restaurant choices, all while documenting our perfect couple moments for social media. The contrast between her online portrayal of our marriage and the reality was crazy. The night after that dinner party, scrolling through her Instagram, I saw she'd posted photos from the evening. Amazing dinner with amazing friends, and my amazing husband who made it all happen. The comments were filled with heart emojis and couple goals responses. That's when it truly hit me. I was living in two different marriages, the public one she crafted online and the private one where I was constantly reminded I wasn't enough. As morning light came through our bedroom curtains, I realized with startling clarity, this wasn't love, this was abuse, and it had been happening for years. The realization that I was in an abusive marriage changed something fundamental inside me. For the first time, I started paying attention to the little things I'd been ignoring, like how protective she was with her phone, how she'd always turn it face down when I entered the room, how she'd step outside to take certain calls, claiming they were work-related, even at 10 p.m. On weekends, I'd never been the jealous type. I trusted her completely, even when friends hinted I maybe shouldn't. All those overnight conferences, my buddy Tom had said once, just seems convenient, I'd shut him down immediately. She's not like that, I'd insisted. Her career is important to her. 2 days after the dinner party, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while taking a shower. It buzzed repeatedly with incoming messages. I'd never snooped before. Trust had always been important to me, even when I was the only one practicing it, but something made me look this time. The lock screen showed messages from someone saved as RY, regional training. Missing you already, baby. Last night was incredible. Still feel you on me. When can you get away again? Need more of that ass. My hands were shaking as I picked up her phone. By some bitter coincidence, she hadn't changed her password since we'd set up each other's phones years ago. I opened the message thread and felt the room spin around me. Hundreds of messages stretched back months, explicit photos, detailed accounts of hotel meetups, plans for their next encounter. This gym guy, Ryan, wasn't even her co-worker like I'd first thought. He was some loser she met at a work conference, a part-time personal trainer, who worked at her hotel's gym but mostly lived off his parents at 35. From their messages, I gathered he was living in their basement apartment and driving his dad's old car. They had inside jokes about me, about my job, about my performance in bed, about how clueless I was. The most recent messages discussed their plans for tomorrow night. Apparently, I would be working late, which was news to me, but what truly destroyed me were the messages where they discussed me. He has no idea, she'd written. Too busy trying to please me to notice anything. Ryan had asked if she felt guilty for being with a real man for once. He should thank me for staying with him this long. At least Ryan knows how to use what he's got, even if all he's got is a big D and not much else, lol. I scrolled further back, finding messages from the night of the dinner party. He just sits there and takes it, she'd written. I practically called him tiny and inadequate in front of everyone, and he still served them with a smile. It's almost too easy, Ryan responded. That's because he knows he can't do better than you. Bet he jerks off thinking about you fucking a real man. There were pictures too, comparing us, explicit details about how much bigger and better Ryan was, how he could go all night while I couldn't last 5 minutes, how she'd come home from their meetups and lie next to me, still feeling him inside her. I felt sick. I felt rage, but mostly I felt a strange, cold clarity that I hadn't felt in years. I kept reading, unable to stop myself. The messages went back 7 months, almost to the day. But there were references to others before Ryan mentions of a David and someone called T, who apparently had been fun while it lasted. My entire marriage flashed before my eyes. All those late nights at the office, the weekend conferences, the girls' trips, had any of it been real? Had she ever been faithful? I heard the shower turn off upstairs. With mechanical precision, I took screenshots of key conversations, texted them to myself, then deleted the messages from her phone. I replaced the phone exactly where I'd found it, then walked to the kitchen sink and splashed cold water on my face. When she came downstairs, wrapped in her robe with her hair in a towel, I was calmly making coffee. "Sleep well?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Like a baby," she replied, completely unaware that her world was about to come crashing down. I printed key documents and screenshots, securing them in a folder. Then I called my buddy Tom, asking if I could stay at his place for a few days. Tom and I go way back to high school. He's the kind of friend who would help you bury a body and never ask questions. We played rugby together, got into our share of trouble as teenagers, and he was the best man at my wedding. "Everything okay?" he asked, immediately sensing something was wrong. "Not really," I admitted. "Can't talk about it right now, but I need a place to crash for a bit. Mi casa es tu casa, brother," he said without hesitation. "Want me to bring beer?" "Maybe tomorrow," I said. "Tonight, the first need a clear head." Next, I contacted a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but Margaret Klein, reputed to be the most ruthless divorce attorney in the city. Her firm's tagline was literally, "We don't get even, we get everything." "I can see you at 3:00 p.m., she said, after hearing the briefest outline of my situation. "Bring any financial records you can gather, and those screenshots." I spent the next hour gathering what I could without raising suspicion: bank statements, investment account information, even took photos of her jewelry collection, things I'd bought her over the years that were worth thousands. That evening, I acted completely normal. I asked about her day, I made dinner, I suggested watching her favorite show, all while the folder sat hidden in my briefcase by the door. All while she texted him right next to me on the couch, smiling at her phone screen. "Good news at work?" I asked casually. "Just a project coming together," she replied without looking up. "Nothing you'd understand." I nodded and sipped my bourbon, studying her face, the stranger I'd shared my life with for 9 years, the woman who had systematically destroyed my self-worth while betraying me in the most fundamental way possible. "I love you," I said, testing the words. She glanced up briefly. "Love you too," she responded automatically before returning to her phone. That moment of practiced, empty routine made everything crystal clear. I wasn't just being belittled and mocked. I was being actively deceived by someone who held no real love for me. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something unexpected rising within me, not heartbreak, not even anger, but a cool, clarifying resolve. It was time to end the charade. I'm not going to lie, part of me wanted to confront her right then, to throw her phone against the wall, and watch her face as I laid out every detail I knew. The old me, the fighter who never backed down from a challenge, was screaming to be let loose. But the strategist in me, the part that had helped me climb from entry level to regional manager, knew better. This wasn't a bar fight. This was psychological warfare, and I needed to be smart. So I waited, and I planned. The meeting with Margaret went exactly as I'd hoped. She was cold, calculating, and completely on my side. "This is an extremely strong case," she said, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. "The infidelity is well documented, and from what you've described, there's a clear pattern of emotional abuse." "What do I do next?" I asked. "Don't confront her yet," Margaret advised. "We need to secure your assets first. Move half the money from your joint accounts to a new personal account. Document everything of value in the house. Forward me any additional evidence of the affairs. And, most importantly, don't let her know you're planning to leave until we're ready." I followed her instructions to the letter. Over the next 2 days, I methodically prepared for the end of my marriage. I opened a new bank account at a different bank. I documented our assets. I even took the day off work to move essential belongings to Tom's place while she was at work. I also did one more thing. I found Ryan's social media accounts and figured out who his parents were. A quick search revealed their address, the same basement apartment he was living in. I did some digging and found out his dad was actually a pastor at a local church. That information might come in handy later. Everything was in place for the confrontation I knew had to happen. That evening, I prepared her favorite dinner salmon with roasted vegetables and white wine. She came home, surprised by the romantic setup. "What's the occasion?" she asked, tossing her keys on the counter. "Just felt like doing something nice," I replied, pouring her a glass of wine. "How was your day?" "Busy, stressful, the usual." She checked her phone again, probably messaging Ryan before sitting down. We ate in relative silence until I finally spoke. "I need to talk to you about something important," she sighed dramatically. "Can it wait?" "I'm exhausted." "No, it can't." I placed the folder on the table between us. "I know about the affair." Her expression cycled rapidly through shock, denial, and calculation before settling on indignation. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder and laid out the evidence piece by piece: the hotel receipts, the text message screenshots, the restaurant bills, the phone records. "You went through my phone?" she snapped, attempting to flip the script. "That's a complete invasion of privacy." "Yes, I did," I admitted calmly. "After years of your emotional abuse and public humiliation, I finally listened to my instincts." She laughed incredulously. "Abuse? Are you serious right now? I've supported you through everything. You've belittled me at every opportunity," I countered. "You've mocked my height, my performance in bed, my career, all while sleeping with some deadbeat who lives in his parents' basement." Her eyes widened. "You don't know anything about Ryan." "I know enough. I know he's 35 and lives with mommy and daddy. I know his father's a pastor who would probably be fascinated to learn what his son has been up to. I know he's not even on your company payroll despite you listing him as a work contact." Her strategy shifted instantly. Tears formed in her eyes. "I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. We can work through this. The affair is just one part of why this marriage is over," I explained, maintaining my composure. "Even without it, I wouldn't stay with someone who treats me with such contempt." She reached across the table for my hand. I pulled back. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "I've been under so much pressure at work." He was just there. It was a moment of weakness. 7 months of moments, I corrected her. "And the things you said about me." Her tears vanished instantly, replaced by cold fury. "Fine. You want the truth?" "Yes. I've been unhappy." "What did you expect?" "You never satisfied me, not financially, not emotionally, not physically." I nodded, almost relieved to finally hear her honest thoughts. "That's exactly why I'm leaving. I deserve better than someone who sees me that way." "You?" she scoffed. "Better than me? Good luck finding anyone who will put up with your limitations." She gestured dismissively at my crotch. "By limitations, do you mean my inability to detect bullshit? Because that's definitely improved recently." I smiled, feeling strangely calm. "Or maybe you mean my limitation of believing my wife when she said she loved me? That one's cured too." Her face contorted with anger. "You think this is funny? You think you can just walk away from me?" "I'm not walking away from you," I corrected her. "I'm walking away from this." I gestured between us. "This isn't a marriage, it's a performance, and I'm done playing my part." In that moment, looking at her beautiful face twisted with cruelty, I felt a strange sense of peace. This woman had never loved me. She'd only loved controlling me, diminishing me. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said. "The divorce papers will be ready tomorrow. I'll be staying elsewhere until it's finalized." Her expression changed again, panic breaking through the contempt. You can't be serious. Where will you go? What will people think? I don't care what people think anymore, I replied, standing up. That was always your concern, not mine. As I moved toward the door where I'd stashed my overnight bag earlier, she rushed after me, grabbing my arm. Wait! We need to talk about this. You can't just throw away 9 years. I removed her hand firmly. You threw them away one comment, one lie, one betrayal at a time. You'll never make it without me, she hissed, her mask completely fallen now. You were nothing when I met you. I made you who you are. I laughed at that, genuinely amused. Is that what you tell yourself? That the regional manager with his own house and car was nothing? That the guy everyone at work respects was nothing? That's some impressive revisionist history. Where will you go? She demanded again. That's no longer your concern, I said simply. For the first time in our marriage, I saw something new in her eyes, not love, not affection, but a stunned recognition that I was no longer under her control. You'll regret this, she whispered. You'll never find anyone like me. I smiled genuinely. That's exactly what I'm counting on. I walked out of our house that night with just a duffel bag and my laptop. The cool evening air felt like freedom against my face. Tom was waiting in his truck at the end of the block. I'd arranged everything down to the minute. She followed me to the porch, her voice shifting between rage and desperation. You think this is some kind of movie moment? She shouted. You think you're teaching me a lesson? Get back inside. I kept walking, not looking back. Her voice changed again. Please, she called, softer now. I'm sorry. We can fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever you want. For a second, my steps faltered, 9 years of habit nearly pulling me back into her orbit. She doesn't look happy, Tom observed as we drove away. She's not used to losing control, I replied. Later that night, after a few beers at Tom's place, he finally asked the question I knew was coming. What happened, man? I thought you guys were solid. I showed him some of the screenshots. His face darkened as he read them. Jesus Christ, he muttered. What a fucking psycho. I always thought there was something off about her, but this is next level. Yeah, I agreed, taking another swig of beer. The crazy thing is, I didn't even see it until now. It's like I've been underwater for years, and I just finally came up for air. Tom put his hand on my shoulder. You're going to be okay, brother. You're staying here as long as you need. And when you're ready, we're going to go out and celebrate your freedom. The next 3 days were a blur of practical matters. My lawyer expedited the divorce papers. I opened new accounts. I arranged for a moving company to collect my remaining possessions while she was at work. I found a small apartment and signed a 6-month lease. Throughout it all, my phone never stopped. Her messages came in waves, angry, then pleading, then threatening, then bargaining. You can't do this to me at 3:47 a.m. Please come home and talk about this at 4:12 a.m. If you go through with this, I'll make sure everyone knows what a failure you are in bed. At 7:03 a.m., I didn't mean it, baby. I was just angry. I love you so much. Please call me at 11:30 a.m. I didn't respond to any of them. My lawyer had advised against it, and frankly, I had nothing left to say. She showed up at my office, creating a scene that only reinforced my decision. My assistant had to call security to escort her out. My boss called me into his office afterward. Is everything okay? He asked, concerned. That seemed intense. I took a deep breath and decided to be honest. I'm getting divorced. Found out my wife has been cheating on me, among other issues. To my surprise, he nodded sympathetically. Been there. My first wife had an affair with our neighbor. Worst time of my life, but trust me, it gets better. I hope so, I said. Take whatever time you need, he offered. And if you need someone to talk to who's been through it, my door's open. She sent her sister to talk sense into me, which backfired when her sister, after hearing the full story, quietly told me she understood my decision. She's always been like this, her sister confessed. She did the same thing to her college boyfriend, made him feel worthless, until he believed it. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked. Her sister looked down, ashamed. "I tried once." She didn't speak to me for a year afterward. I guess I was a coward. I didn't stop there, though. Remember how I mentioned Ryan's dad was a pastor? Well, I sent an anonymous package to his church with printouts of some of the more explicit messages between Ryan and Laura, nothing identifying her directly, but enough that his parents would know what their precious boy was up to, breaking up a marriage and living a lifestyle that directly contradicted their teachings. Was it petty? Maybe, but sometimes karma needs a little help. On the fourth day, I returned to the house with a police escort to collect some personal items. I didn't trust the movers with family photos, heirlooms from my parents, important documents. She was waiting, eyes red and puffy. "You called the police on me?" she hissed as I entered. "I'm just here for my things," I said, moving past her to her bedroom. She followed me, watching silently as I collected what remained of my life before her. "What about all the good times?" she finally asked. "You're just throwing everything away?" I paused, considering my answer carefully. "No, you did that when you decided I wasn't enough. I never said, you didn't have to say it. You showed it every day in 1,000 tiny ways." For the first time, she seemed to have no response. She stood in the doorway, diminished somehow, as I carried my box toward the front door. As I reached the threshold, she made one last attempt. "Your name is still on the mortgage," she said. "You're still responsible for half." I nodded. "The lawyer will sort that out. Sell the house if you need to." "I can't afford it alone," she admitted, vulnerability breaking through her armor. "That's not my problem anymore." Her face contorted with a flash of the old contempt. "This is exactly why I needed someone else. You're too weak to even fight for our marriage." I looked at her looked at her one last time. In that moment, I saw her clearly, not the goddess I'd placed on a pedestal, not the cruel manipulator of recent days, but just a flawed, insecure person who had built herself up by tearing others down. "I'm not fighting for something that hurts me," I said simply. "That's not weakness. That's self-respect." I closed the door behind me, her first genuine sob breaking through as it clicked shut. The sound followed me down the walkway raw, uncontrolled, and strangely satisfying. In the police officer's car, I exhaled fully for what felt like the first time in years. My phone buzzed again, with her incoming call. I turned it off. "All good?" the officer asked. "Getting there," I replied, watching our house shrink in the side mirrors as we drove away. The officer, an older guy with graying temples, nodded knowingly. "Been on a lot of these domestic calls." "Never gets easier." "Domestic?" "I'm not," I started to protest. "Not all abuse leaves bruises, son," he said quietly. "Seen plenty of men in your position. Nobody talks about it much, but it happens." I hadn't really thought about it in those terms before me, a victim of domestic abuse. It didn't fit the image I had of myself. But then again, neither did cheated on husband or divorced guy at 38. Life has a way of giving you identities you never asked for. 6 months can change everything. The divorce was finalized faster than expected. She didn't contest it once she realized I wouldn't return. Margaret, my lawyer, was ruthlessly efficient. We got a fair division of assets, and I didn't try to take her to the cleaners, even though I probably could have. I just wanted out. The house sold quickly in a hot market, and after splitting the proceeds, I had enough to place a down payment on a sleek condo downtown, closer to my office, 2 bedrooms, industrial style with exposed brick and big windows, the complete opposite of the suburban McMansion we'd lived in. This place actually felt like me. I later heard through mutual friends that her pharmaceutical company downsized her division 2 months after our separation. Apparently, her boss had been protecting her mediocre performance because they were having an affair too. When his wife found out and threatened divorce, he ended things with her, and she was the first one cut in the layoffs.